Snow swallows every sign of movement in a quiet forest, yet you feel watched. A path lies ahead, but no print marks its surface. The winter without footsteps speaks to you tonight. It pulls you toward old fears, old nights, old storms. A forgotten traveler once crossed this place, and signs faded before dawn. No one knew why prints failed to form under him. No one knew why winds refused to touch his trail. You feel his story reach toward your own winter. You feel his breath in cold air. Stay with this tale. It holds your steps, even when snow hides your way. Our story follows a real man from the late 1700s. His name was Elias Kruger, a widower who moved through long winters with slow care and quiet strength. Winter pressed on his small home in the hills, and storms shook loose old shingles. He kept to narrow paths for firewood and for letters sent to a sick sister in a distant village. Snow often rose to his knees. Nights stretched for hours without sound. He walked with a heavy coat, a wool scarf, and steady eyes. Winter shaped his days, his choices, his pace. You meet him now as snow begins to fall again. I am glad you are here. Tell me where you watch from and what time your night begins. Take a slow breath. Let your shoulders sink. Pull a blanket close and rest your hands in a warm place. Settle your body and feel your pulse ease. If you enjoy these stories, like the video, subscribe for calm nights, and share a soft comment below. I read them with care. Elias rose before the first light. Frost pressed against the shutters and turned thin edges of the window into pale silver. His breath met cold air inside the room as he sat up on his straw mattress. He pushed his feet into worn boots lined with wool scraps. Snow rested high against the lower wall outside, heavy from a storm that moved through the hills overnight. His small home felt tight, but warmth from last night's fire still held in the stones near the hearth. He stood for a long moment. His joints ached from old nights spent on floors of supply wagons when he worked as a hauler years earlier. He missed the gentle voice of his wife, Anna, who passed during an early frost 4 winters before. Silence pressed in harder since she left. Even so, Elias stepped into each day with slow intent. He kept order in his chores. He checked chores twice during storms. Snow in these hills shifted without sound, and paths hid under new layers faster than his memory liked. He moved toward the hearth and stirred faint red embers. Sparks rose, drifting toward a blackened pothook. He fed the fire with 2 small birch logs. Flames spread in thin lines before settling. Warmth touched his fingers at once, and he held them near the glow longer than needed. Today he planned to walk the northern path for firewood. The path twisted along a ridge and dropped down toward a stand of old pines. Storms bent branches over the trail without warning, and deep pockets of snow hid roots that waited for careless boots. Elias knew every bend of it. He also knew snow-crushed trail signs by morning. He stepped outside. Wind held still between the trees. No rustle from branches, no creak from his shed. The forest stretched in a white sheet, smooth in all directions. He looked down for his old prints from yesterday's return trip. None waited for him. He paused. Snow from the storm explained some of it. Yet even near the door, where the roof shielded a strip of ground, no trace settled. He rubbed his palms together and lifted his chin toward the ridge. He set out along the narrow line where the path once ran. His boots sank deep with each step. Snow brushed his knees and slipped inside one boot as he moved. He breathed slow to control the cold creeping up his leg. The ridge stayed quiet. Too quiet for this hour. Birds often stirred near dawn. Today, no wing moved in the air. Elias leaned forward to watch the ground. His steps left dents in the snow, yet behind him, those dents softened as wind carried fresh flakes. He stopped and waited. Snow drifted without motion from above. No wind reached his coat. Still the dents faded. He watched them shrink until the surface behind him looked untouched again. He swallowed hard. His tongue felt dry. He muttered something to himself, a small line his mother once used when she walked through winter fields. A line about morning strength. He repeated it in a rough whisper and pressed onward. The ridge rose higher. Tree trunks lined both sides. Bark held frost in strange patterns shaped by night moisture. As he reached the midpoint of the ridge, the world changed. A cool glow settled across the ground. It came from no lantern. Clouds parted above him, though he saw no break. A thin silver light moved across the snow without shadows. Elias stopped again. He lifted his eyes toward the higher hill that overlooked his path. Something stood there, a faint outline, shoulders, a head, a long shape in the snow. He waited, frozen in place. Breath left his mouth in a slow white stream. The figure did not move. Snow covered its feet. No prints led toward it. He lowered his gaze toward the creature's shape. No beast he knew stood like this. Human form, but still. Tall, thin, and blurred at the edges, as if air shifted around it. He gripped the strap of his satchel. A letter for his sister lay inside. She fought illness since autumn. He wrote her 2 lines last night. He needed to take the letter to the village courier tomorrow. Elias stepped backward. The figure did not follow. He turned and hurried along the ridge. He kept his head forward as fear rose behind his ribs. Snow softened sound from his boots. Nothing followed him. He tried to breathe deep and steady. His heart still pounded. At the base of the ridge, he reached the stand of old pines. Dark branches reached low, heavy from frost. He ducked under them and found the fallen tree he planned to cut. The trunk leaned against 2 young saplings. Bark split on the side facing him. A good supply of wood waited here. He set his satchel down and pulled his hatchet free. For a moment, work pushed fear aside. He lifted the hatchet. The first strike hit the trunk with a dull sound. Chips flew. He struck again. He fell into rhythm. His breath warmed the scarf around his neck and eased the tightness in his chest. Then a soft sound reached him. Snow touching snow. A slow shift. Not wind, not branches. He stopped swinging. He waited. Snow fell in grains from above. No shape moved beyond the pines. He stepped out from under the branches and looked toward the ridge. The figure stood closer now. Same height, same blurred outline. No prints behind it. Elias stumbled back. His heel hit the fallen log. Pain traveled up his leg. His pulse rose. He pulled his satchel close and slung it over his shoulder. He turned away from the ridge and moved deeper into the pine stand. Branches scraped his coat. Snow dropped on his back. He moved fast but not blind. He reached a narrow hollow where rocks formed a low arch. He ducked under it and pressed his body against the stone wall. Minutes passed. Snow covered the log where he worked. No figure entered the pines. No sound rose except slow flakes settling. Elias pressed his hand against his chest. Sweat ran from his hairline. Cold air touched the wetness and chilled him. His thoughts drifted to stories old men spoke in taverns in his youth. Stories about winter guides who walked between storms. Spirits with no weight on snow. He once dismissed them as attempts to scare children into returning home before nightfall. Yet now he saw something he could not explain. He waited longer until fear eased. Then he stepped back toward the fallen log. The ridge looked empty now. Wind picked up and moved small waves of snow across the surface. Elias returned to his work. His hands shook. He forced them steady. He chopped wood until he filled the small sled he dragged behind him. He tied the load tight with rope and set out toward home. He kept his eyes on bends in the trail. Every few steps he glanced behind him. Fresh snow covered his prints each time he checked. He pushed forward, quick at first, then slower as his breath tightened. Near his home, smoke still rose from the chimney. He reached the door and stepped inside. Warm air wrapped around him. Relief loosened his shoulders. He slid the sled into the storage area near the hearth and dropped the rope on the floor. He sat on the bench by the window. He left his coat on. He did not want to move far from the window, though he feared what he might see. Snow fell heavy again. The ridge vanished behind thick flakes. Elias stayed there until light shifted from grey to faint blue. Then he stood. He poured hot water from the kettle into a small tin cup and held it between both hands. He stared into the fire. His thoughts returned to the shape on the ridge. He remembered its edges, its stillness. His pulse rose again. He spoke low, his voice rough. He promised himself he would not let fear turn him from his duties. He needed to deliver the letter to the courier tomorrow. His sister depended on those lines. Her village doctor required payment from time to time, and Elias handled the payment each month. Winter tested everything, but he refused to let distance separate him from her. He set the cup aside and walked to his work table. He lifted the letter and slid it into an inner pocket of his coat. He touched the edges of the paper. He stepped back toward the window. Snow gathered in waves near the fence. He saw no marks in the yard. Night approached. Shadows thickened in the corners of the room. Elias added fresh wood to the fire. He watched flames rise. His breath slowed again. Yet unease stayed with him. He prayed for strength to move through tomorrow without fear. He hoped for answers. A shape walked winter paths without prints. One storm did not explain it. He sat again and sharpened his hatchet. Each pass of the stone steadied his mind. The sound brought a sense of order. When he finished, he placed the hatchet beside the hearth. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and rested his head against the wall. He drifted in and out of light sleep for a while. A creak from the roof woke him. Snow slid from the eaves. He opened his eyes. He reached for the lantern and lit it. He walked to the front door and cracked it open. Cold rushed in. Darkness spread across the yard. He scanned the open space. Snow fell lighter now. Moonlight pressed through thin clouds. His breath lifted in thin trails. Then he saw it. Near the fence, a faint line of shape. The same outline. Still. Watching. No prints around it. Elias shut the door fast and dropped the bar across it. His hands shook harder now. He stepped back and gripped the lantern handle tight. The shape did not knock. It did not speak. It stayed silent as the snow fell. Elias stood near the hearth, tired and tense. He whispered his wife's name once. He asked for calm, for direction. Morning might bring clarity. He waited through long hours until sleep pressed heavy on his shoulders. When dawn broke, grey light spread across the floorboards. Elias moved to the door and lifted the bar. He stepped outside. Snow held no prints. The fence looked untouched. He scanned the ridge. Nothing stood there. Only wind crossed the surface now. He turned toward the path to the village. Today, he needed to leave early. Distance between here and the courier house stretched long in winter. He stepped forward. His breath rose in clouds. Snow swallowed sound beneath his boots. Behind him, the surface smoothed again without a sign of prints. Elias moved at a steady pace along the narrow path that led from his hill toward the main route between villages. Cold air stung the inside of his nose. His scarf held a thin layer of frost from each breath. Trees leaned close over the trail. Branches bent low with fresh snow from the night. Dawn tried to break, but clouds kept light thin and flat. Powder drifted from the higher limbs with each small shift of wind. He kept one hand on the strap of his satchel. Inside lay the letter for his sister. He touched it through the cloth. Pride pressed through his fear. He wrote with care each time. His handwriting stayed neat, shaped from his days as a clerk for a grain merchant in his youth. Those days felt far now, like a life he stepped out of. Winter gave no space for comfort. Work is shaped every hour. A man alone learned to push through stillness. The slope ahead dropped toward an old marker stone set into the ground. That stone guided travelers toward the crossroad miles down. When he reached it, he slowed. Snow sat deep around the base. He brushed flakes aside with his glove. The shape and letters carved into the stone looked unchanged. Yet behind him the path he walked already smoothed. No prints stayed. He turned his head and studied the whiteness. His throat tightened. He forced his eyes forward and pressed on. A mile from the marker stone, the path curved near a frozen brook. The brook held a thick layer of ice shaped by weeks of cold. Small patches of snow clung to the surface in uneven lines. Elias stepped off the path and knelt by the bank. He cupped a handful of snow and pressed it to his face. It eased tension from his eyes. He set the snow down and listened. Silence sat heavy here. No crack from ice, no call from birds. He held his breath. In that silence, the memory of the figure returned. The shape near his fence. The same shape on the ridge. His heart pushed against his ribs. He stood. He wanted to hurry, but he forced calm. A forced rush in winter led to mistakes. He kept his pace steady while his thoughts turned in circles. Old stories from childhood surfaced again. His grandmother once told him about winter watchers. She spoke of travelers who walked ahead of those lost in storms. If the watchers lingered near a man's home, she said, he faced a turning in his life. At the time, he laughed. Now the old line returned like a whisper. He brushed snow from his coat sleeve and stepped onto the bridge of frozen stones near the brook. The stones formed a line between banks. Snow hid their edges. He placed each foot with care. Ice cracked once under his heel, but the stones held. Beyond the brook, the ground rose toward a long stretch of open field. Winters here always shaped the field into a white bowl pressed between two low hills. Wind often raced across it. Today the wind held still, yet snow shifted in waves as if touched by things he did not see. He stepped forward into the open. The field gave a clear view for a long distance. He found ease in the space at first. No dark shapes, no watchers, no movement. He kept his eyes forward, yet the urge to glance over his shoulder grew stronger with each step. Halfway through the field, he heard a sound behind him. Slow, soft, snow meeting snow. He froze. He did not turn. He listened. The sound reached him again. A slight weight settling on the surface. He felt pressure in the back of his neck as if something watched. He turned. Nothing stood behind him. The entire field looked smooth. No prints behind him. No dents in the snow. He lifted his foot and watched the spot he stepped from. The print shrank before his eyes. Snow slid across it, as if shaped by an invisible hand. The surface leveled. His breath caught. He stepped backward on instinct. His heel sank. He turned and pushed on through the field. He refused to look back this time. A line of houses from the first village appeared on the far side. Thin smoke rose from chimneys. Relief touched him. Human sight eased fear. The village sat quiet, most doors still shut at this hour, but he knew the route through the center. He reached the first cottage and paused. Snow covered every step of the walkway. He listened. Only the faint hum of winter filled the air. He pressed forward until he reached the small square where a wooden trough stood. The trough held frozen water for passing livestock during warmer months. Now it looked like a block of white stone. Elias rubbed his hands together. Heat returned to his fingers. He walked toward the lane that led out of the village and toward the courier house. Houses along the lane showed signs of early movement. A lantern flickered in one window. A woman pushed open a shutter to shake dust from a rug. She spotted Elias and offered a small nod. He raised his hand in return. Connection, even brief, eased his chest. He stepped onward. Past the last cottage, the path tightened between two lines of bare trees. Their trunks stretched high and thin. Branches touched above him. Snow clung to every limb. The air here smelled older, damp, heavy. He walked with care. An hour passed in slow steps. Elias reached the bend where the courier house came into view. A narrow building stood near the road. Smoke rose from the chimney. A small shed sat to the right. 2 sled tracks led toward the shed, though snow filled them halfway. Elias felt new strength. He neared the porch, lifted his hand to knock, then stopped. The door stood open with a small crack. He pushed it wider and stepped inside. Warmth met him. A pot steamed near the hearth. A wool coat hung on a peg. The courier, a man named Hollin, often left early on certain days, but on courier days, he never failed to wait for letters. Elias moved toward the desk near the far wall. A stack of envelopes lay there. A few coins sat beside them. But Hollin did not sit in his usual chair. Elias looked around the room. He waited for sound from the back. None reached him. He stepped outside again and checked the shed. Sled runners lay in a neat row. Feed bags hung from hooks. No sign of struggle. No tracks leading away. Snow near the shed looked smooth. Elias called Hollin's name once. His voice sounded thin in the air. He waited. No reply came. He stepped back toward the main road. Snow fell again. Light flakes drifted and caught in his hair. He stared at the line of white stretching across the hill beyond the courier house. He felt watched again. He placed the letter on the desk inside and weighed it with a small stone. He wrote a short line on a scrap of paper for Hollin, a line telling him to take the letter to the next outbound cart. He set the scrap under the stone with the letter. He stepped outside once more, pulled the door shut, and faced the open land. He had two choices: return home at once or search for Hollin. He felt the weight of his promise to his sister. The letter needed to leave today. He handled that. Now fear shaped his next step. Hollin's absence pressed on his mind. He followed the main road for half a mile. Snow covered everything. Then something strange caught his eye. Ahead lay a mound near the roadside, not shaped like wind, not shaped like a drift. He inched closer till details formed. A sled, half buried, its harness twisted, wood splintered on one side. He moved around the sled and brushed snow from the top. A glove lay inside, dark, thick, stiff from frost. Hollin's glove. A dull ache filled Elias's chest. He lifted the glove. Snow cascaded off the fingers. He scanned the ground. No prints, not from Hollin, not from beasts, only smooth white. He stepped back. Fear tightened again. He pictured Hollin stepping out of his house this morning. Perhaps he stepped toward the sled to check supplies. Perhaps he walked into a patch of snow that swallowed prints, or something else reached him. Elias forced his breath to steady. He looked at the hills. A soft haze sat low over them. If Hollin lay hurt somewhere, Elias needed to try. Yet each step forward might press him into the presence of the watcher, the outline on the ridge, the shape near his fence, the form with no prints. He raised his eyes toward the sky. Clouds thickened again. Light dimmed. He made choice slower than he wanted. He stepped away from the sled and moved toward the hill. His heart thumped. Snow brushed his legs. At the base of the hill he paused. The land rose in a slow curve. Dried weeds poked through the snow in thin stalks. He touched one. It snapped between his fingers. He let the pieces fall. He marched up the slope. Breath quickened. Sweat touched his lower back from effort. He pushed on till he reached the crest. Here the land opened wide. Snow waved in gentle rises. Air smelled older again. Still no signs of Hollin. Then he spotted something small. Far across the open plain, a dark speck against the white. He narrowed his eyes. The speck looked like cloth. A coat. Perhaps Hollin's. He moved toward it, pace quick. Then he slowed again. Distance fooled him. After several minutes he reached the speck. It lay still. A piece of cloth torn from a coat. Frost stiffened the edges. He swallowed. He searched the area with careful steps. The surface lay smooth. No marks to guide him. Wind rose then. Light. Yet enough to shift flakes in a slow drift. Elias turned with the wind. His eyes widened. The watcher stood on the far side of the plain. Same height. Same blurred outline. Still. No prints around it. Fear pressed into his throat. He took a step back. The figure did not move. He kept his eyes locked on its form. He lifted the torn cloth. He held it in a tight fist. Hollin might still live. The watcher gave no hint. Elias felt caught between duty and dread. He backed away until a slight dip in the land blocked his sight of the figure. Once hidden, He turned and hurried toward the courier house. Snow fell harder now. Each breath felt heavy. When he reached the path near the village, he slowed. He sensed the watcher behind him, though clouds hid every shape. He kept moving. He entered the village square. Doors stayed shut, windows dim. He reached the far side of the village and continued toward home. Snow pressed against his legs. His boots sank deep. Cold found his bones. Hours later, he reached his hill. His cottage stood quiet with smoke rising through the chimney. Relief washed through him. He reached the door, stepped inside, and shut out the wind. Warmth hit him. He leaned on the table and caught his breath. He placed the torn cloth on the wood surface. He felt the rough fibers under his palm. He thought of the watcher again. Each sight grew closer. Each time, no tracks remained. For a moment, he held to the hope the watcher linked to Holland's fate. For another moment, he feared the watcher marked him for some turn in his own path. He poured hot water from the kettle and sipped. Steam warmed his face. Snow tapped against the window. Night neared again. Elias stood at the window for a long time. He waited for any shape to cross the ridge. The ridge held calm, no outline, no sign. He sat by the fire and held the torn cloth. He whispered Holland's name. He asked for mercy on whoever or whatever crossed his path. He ended the words and closed his eyes as exhaustion settled over him. Elias slept in short stretches through the night. Dreams rose in fragments. Snow moved in soft waves. A shape without weight drifted near his window. Holland's torn cloth rested on the table. His mind circled the same questions, but answers never settled. When dawn broke, he opened his eyes slow. Light from the hearth reached the far corner of the room. He pushed himself up and sat upright. His neck ached from how he slept. He walked to the window and lifted the curtain. Grey sky stretched wide. Snow rose along the fence in tall mounds shaped by night wind. The ridge sat half hidden. He searched each bend of it. No outline stood there. He let out a slow breath and rubbed his face with both hands. He moved toward the table, lifted the torn cloth, and pressed it between his palms. Holland did not leave his coat without reason. Elias rested the cloth back on the table and stepped toward the hearth. He stirred embers and added new wood. Sparks drifted upward until the logs caught flame. His throat felt dry. He wanted hot water, but the sight of the torn cloth kept him still for a moment. He pictured Holland's steady voice when he sorted letters. He pictured him feeding the horses behind the courier house. Those memories felt close. They sat heavy now. He poured hot water into a tin cup and held it with both hands. He sipped slow and felt warmth spread through his chest. His breath steadied. He needed strength before facing the outside world again. He had a duty to his sister. The letter rested safe inside the courier house. Now a different duty pressed on him. Holland might lie hurt. Snow hid signs. The watcher stood silent each time he crossed open land. Something formed a path around him that refused to hold prints. Elias pulled his coat on and stepped outside. Air bit at his cheeks. Snow reached the tops of his boots. He pushed forward. Today he planned to follow the old trapper route above the ridge. It led toward deeper woods behind his land. Holland might have taken shelter there if he wandered off course. Elias set his jaw and leaned into the wind. Trees near his home swayed slow. Frost hung from their branches in long threads. The narrow path uphill turned slick. Ice hid under fresh snow. Elias gripped a fallen branch and used it as support. He climbed higher until he reached the ridge. The ridge felt different now. Air heavier, light weaker. He scanned the horizon while snow fell in soft sheets. The watcher did not stand there. Relief came, though faint. He stepped forward and followed the trapper route north. This route bent around a frozen pond known for thin patches. The old trappers always walked its edge with steady steps. As he reached the pond, he saw a break in the surface. Ice fractured in a thin line near the far bank. Snow gathered along the crack. He frowned. He moved closer and crouched. The break looked fresh. No prints near it. Only the smooth white he now expected. He touched the snow. Cold seeped through his glove. He whispered Hollin's name. If Hollin crossed here before dawn, the ice might have given under his weight. Elias stared into the dark water through the thin gap, but he saw no coat, no hat, no shape, only deep shadows. He stepped back and stood still for a long time. Air around him moved in faint circles. Branches above him gave off a low creak. He felt watched again. He turned. The watcher stood on the opposite side of the pond. Tall, still, no face, edges blurred, no prints around it. Cold pushed hard into Elias's chest. He gripped his coat and held his breath. Minutes passed. The watcher did not move. Snow drifted between them, thinning the figure. Elias stepped backwards slow. Each step pressed fear deeper into him. He kept his eyes on the figure until a stand of birch trees blocked his view. He turned and hurried along the trapper route. His breath came fast. His boots sank deep. His scarf stiffened with frost. He pushed on until he reached a narrow slope leading down into the deeper woods. Here branches grew thick. Bark held lichen in shades of pale green. Snow clung to every space between them. He moved with care. He searched for signs of broken branches or dropped items. Snow covered much, yet even here no prints stayed behind him. His fear for Hollin shifted into fear for everything near him. Something shaped winter in ways he never knew. He followed the slope until it leveled near a line of spruce trees. Their branches drooped low. He stopped at the trunk of the largest one. Something dark lay half buried near the base. He knelt and brushed snow aside. A leather strap, thick, the same kind Hollin used on his satchel. Elias lifted it. Snow drifted off the surface. The strap held a small metal clasp with a pattern Hollin often etched into his tools. Elias closed his eyes for a moment. Hope and dread pressed together. He stood and looked between the spruce trunks. No shape moved. He walked farther, scanning each hollow. A tree with 3 thick branches formed a shelter of sorts. Snow piled under it in a smooth mound. He approached with careful steps. He used his stick to probe the mound. Beneath the snow, he felt something hard. He brushed snow away. A piece of wood emerged, then another, a section of sled runner, the same color as Hollin's sled. He stepped back. Cold rose up his spine. Something broke the sled and left no tracks. Something took Hollin from the road and moved through trees without touching ground. The watcher's stillness held new meaning now. Elias pressed the strap into his coat pocket. He backed away from the mound and followed the route toward higher ground. He needed height to see if smoke rose from anywhere. Hollin might have reached a shelter farther north. He climbed for nearly an hour. Breath rasped in his throat. Snow pressed heavy on his boots. His legs burned. Light shifted as clouds thickened overhead. The sky darkened early, though morning still held. He reached the crest of the hill. From there he saw long stretches of white forest. No smoke rose. No movement. No sign of life. Only the calm, terrible quiet. He turned in a slow circle. A faint shadow moved near the far edge of the clearing. His pulse jumped. He kept his body still and lowered his eyes slightly. He lifted them again in a quick glance. The watcher stood there, nearer than before. Same blurred lines, same impossible stillness. Elias took one slow step back, then another. Snow fell between them in soft crystals. He felt a change in the air, a pull, as if the watcher wanted him to move in a certain direction. Elias gripped the strap of his satchel. He forced his breath to steady. He stepped backward until trees hid the figure again. He turned and moved down the opposite side of the hill. He wanted to reach home before dark. Trails twisted. Snow covered everything. He hurried too fast and slipped once, falling to one knee. Pain flashed through his leg. He stood again and tested his weight. It held, though sore. He reached the lower path near dusk. Light dimmed fast. Shadows lengthened. Wind picked up and pushed dry snow against his coat. He leaned forward and forced his body through it. He reached his yard at last. His cottage held steady with smoke from the chimney. Relief spread through him. He stepped inside and shut the door. Warmth hit him again. He dropped his stick against the wall and removed his scarf. He placed the leather strap beside the torn cloth. The two items sat like warnings. Holin faced something larger than cold. Elias knew he stood in the same space. He knelt near the fire and lifted a new log into the flames. He watched heat rise. The fire eased his breath. His fear settled into a deep, steady tension. He thought through everything. The Watcher first appeared near the ridge, then near the pines, then near the fence, then in the open field, then by the pond, then again today. Each time closer, each time without prints, each time silent. He pressed his hands to his face. Hours passed before he lifted his head again. He stood and walked to the window. Snow rose in tall waves outside. Wind shaped the drifts with sharp edges. He scanned the ridge one more time. In the grey light, he saw nothing. Yet he felt the Watcher near. Not in sight, but in some old winter sense inside him. He stepped back from the window and sat at his table. He touched the strap. He touched the cloth. He whispered a promise to Holin. He would search again tomorrow. He would not let fear settle him in place. But tonight, he needed rest. He added more wood to the fire and lay on his mattress. The sound of wind filled the room. His eyes stayed open longer than he liked. When sleep finally reached him, it carried the weight of dread and duty. Elias woke before light. Cold air settled in the corners of the room where the fire died low. He pushed himself up slow. His back felt stiff from the long climb through the hills yesterday. He sat on the mattress edge and pushed his feet into his boots. Frost clung to the leather. He pressed the heel of his hand against each lace to tighten them. The house shifted with a faint groan as wind pushed against the outer wall. He walked to the hearth and stirred the grey ash until thin embers glowed. He added 2 small logs and blew soft until flame rose. Orange light reached the far wall and warmed the cold room. He held his hands close to the fire. He felt the stiffness ease from his fingers. His thoughts turned to Holin again. A missing sled, a torn glove, a broken runner, a leather strap. Each sign pointed deeper into the woods behind the pond. He poured hot water from the kettle into his cup and held it between both palms. He drank slow. Warmth spread through his chest and eased the tightness left from yesterday's fear. When he finished, he placed the cup down and reached for the strap and cloth on the table. Their presence unsettled him, yet he needed them. They were proof he followed the right path. Snow outside pressed against the lower frame of the door. He pulled on his coat and stepped out into the yard. Cold air struck him hard. Snowdrifts rose higher than yesterday. Wind slowed to a light drift. Fresh flakes fell in thin sheets. The ridge looked faint under the morning light. He studied every bend. No outline waited there. He moved toward the trapper route again, passing the corner of his shed where snow gathered in tall loops. He lifted the stick he used yesterday for balance. His sore legs stiffened when he took the first step uphill. He ignored the ache and pushed forward. The ridge felt heavier today. The air held a strange weight, he sensed, before seeing anything. He paused and listened. No bird calls, no distant crack of tree limbs. Only the faint hiss of flakes. He reached the top and scanned the open slopes. Nothing moved. He stepped forward and followed the path as it bent toward the pond. As he neared the water, he slowed. The crack in the ice grew wider overnight. Snow drifted into the opening. Water made a dull sound as small chunks of ice shifted. He crouched near the edge and looked at the gap. It held the same dark stillness as before. He rose and turned toward the spruce stand farther north. Yesterday he found the broken runner and strap there. He needed to search deeper. Holin might have moved beyond those trees in search of shelter. The woods thickened as he entered. Snow rested heavy on branches. One branch shifted as he passed under it, dropping a mound of flakes on his shoulder. He brushed them off and moved on. His path stayed slow and careful. The Watcher felt near, though he did not see it. Each time he stepped, snow leveled behind him. After half an hour, he reached a cluster of thick spruce trunks twisted, together as if shaped by age and storms. A narrow hollow sat between two trunks. Snow drifted inside in uneven layers. He knelt to search for items pressed under the surface. His gloves brushed something solid. He cleared snow and found a small metal cup. He lifted it. The bottom held a familiar scratch pattern. Holland often marked his gear with lines he carved to track wear. Elias closed his hand around the cup and drew a slow breath. Holland crossed this space. Something moved through here with him or after him. Elias scanned the trees. The woods stretched in all directions. No sounds reached him. He slipped the cup into his coat pocket and stepped deeper into the spruce stand. He walked until the trees formed a narrow corridor. Snow drifted down the passage like thin fog. Light dimmed. His boots pressed into the surface. Each print faded as soon as he lifted his foot. He paused. He heard a faint sound, a breath that did not belong to him. Slow, hollow, cold. He turned. The watcher stood at the other end of the spruce corridor. Same height, same stillness. No prints, no movement, no face. Edges blurred as though snow shaped its outline. His heart climbed high in his chest. He took one step back. The watcher did nothing. He raised his stick in a poor attempt at defense, though he knew the stick gave him no help against such a presence. He swallowed and backed away. Snow pressed against the trunks beside him. He slipped through the side opening between two spruce trees and turned left. He moved downhill. Branches scraped his coat. Snow brushed his face. His breath rose in fast trails. He did not run. He held to a steady pace that kept his balance. The land opened into a wide hollow. A layer of thin mist sat over the snow. He stopped near the center and listened. No breath except his. No movement. No watcher. Only the faint shift of distant wind. His legs trembled from fear and cold. He knelt and touched the snow. He pressed his fingers deeper until they met something firm. He brushed flakes aside. A wooden box top, hinged. Light frost covered the metal edges. He lifted it slow and revealed a small storage crate. Inside lay a wool scarf and a small knife. Both items looked like Holland's. He remembered the knife. Holland sharpened it each week outside the courier house. Elias lifted the scarf. It smelled faintly of smoke. He set it back in the crate and stared at the open hollow. Holland dropped these items or placed them here for reason. Elias felt pulled forward, toward answers he feared. Snow shifted behind him. He turned fast. The watcher stood at the edge of the hollow. Tall. Still. Snow parted around it. Elias stumbled backward, falling onto one knee. Pain shot through his leg. The watcher did not move. Snow softened around its form. Elias rose slow. His breath shook. He stepped back until the crate blocked his heel. He forced a steady breath. He raised his chin and stared at the watcher. A strange moment stretched between them. Time slowed. Snow fell in thin lines. The watcher's form flickered like heat above stone, though no heat lived in winter. Elias felt a change in himself. Terror still sat heavy, but something else pushed through it. Resolve. He refused to turn from this path. Not now, not with Holland lost somewhere. He stepped forward. One slow step, then another. The watcher did not retreat. It stood silent. Elias stopped only a few paces from where snow shaped its outline. Cold struck his face with sharp force. His pulse rang in his ears. He opened his mouth. Words felt thick. He pushed them out anyway. He asked where Holland went. His voice sounded faint and raw. His breath met the air in small clouds. The watcher stayed silent, but snow around its outline lifted. Fine crystals rose from the ground and swirled in a slow circle. A thin trail of drifting flakes stretched from the watcher toward the north edge of the hollow. A direction. A sign. Elias froze. He stared at the faint drift. The watcher gave no further movement. The snow trail shimmered in pale light. Then the watcher faded. Edges thinned. Form dissolved. Snow filled the space where it stood. Elias lowered his stick. His breath came fast. He looked at the drifting trail again. It led toward thicker woods. Hollin might lie there. Or something else waited. He stepped forward. He followed the faint swirl of snow through the hollow. The drift vanished after several paces, but he remembered the direction. He pressed on. The trees grew dense again. Wind hushed. Snow clung to branches in long sheets. Shadows stretched across the ground. He scanned each trunk, each bend, each hollow. He spotted a shape near the base of a fallen tree. He moved closer and dropped to one knee. A lantern, half buried. Frost coated the glass. Inside, the wick sat unused. Hollin kept this lantern for long routes. He lifted it and brushed off the frost. A thin crack ran down one side of the glass. Maybe the lantern fell. Maybe something threw it. He set the lantern down and searched the ground. He pushed aside snow with his gloves. His fingers met something soft. Cloth. He brushed more snow and uncovered a sleeve. Blue wool. Hollin's coat sleeve. His throat tightened. He lifted more snow and found the torn edge of the coat. No blood. No other signs. Only the sleeve. He stood and looked around him. The woods held a heavy quiet. The coat sleeve lay near the fallen tree as if placed there. He felt the watcher near again, though he saw nothing. He pressed the sleeve into his coat pocket and stepped away. His legs shook from fear and cold. He kept walking until the woods thinned and sunlight broke through clouds in pale streaks. He reached a narrow rise, overlooking a stretch of low land covered in deep snow. Dusk neared. Light faded fast. He needed to return home before night swallowed the paths. He turned back and followed a slow descent toward the ridge. His boots sank deep. His breath rose in clouds. Wind picked up again, pushing fine flakes across his face. He reached the ridge with aching legs. His cottage came into view through thick flakes. He stepped into the yard and opened the door. Warmth met him. Relief washed through him. He set the lantern, sleeve and cup on the table beside the other items. The collection formed a harsh line of signs that Hollin moved through the woods while something else watched him. Elias sat by the fire for a long time. He pressed the sleeve between his palms. His thoughts circled heavy. All signs pointed deeper north. The watcher offered direction today. He felt drawn into something old and silent. The fire cracked. Wind pressed against the shutters. Night settled thick and cold. Elias woke in the middle of the night. No dream pushed him awake. No sound struck the outer wall. He opened his eyes because something in the air changed. A pressure, a shift. A pull felt behind his ribs. He lay still for a long moment. The fire died low. Shadows reached across the ceiling in thin lines. Wind brushed the shutters with soft taps. He sat up slow. Cold swirled around his ankles. He pulled his coat close and rose to his feet. The items on the table lay in a straight line. The torn cloth, leather strap, metal cup, broken runner piece, lantern and coat sleeve. Each one pointed to Hollin's path through the woods. Each one pulled Elias deeper into the winter that moved around him. He walked to the window. His breath fogged the glass. He wiped the frost away with the edge of his sleeve. The yard stretched smooth under the moonlight. Snow pushed against the fence. Trees leaned low from weight. The ridge looked pale and empty. He searched each rise for the watcher. No outline stood in sight. That absence unsettled him more. The watcher appeared each day as if tied to his steps. Silence from it now felt heavy, like something waiting in the dark. He returned to the hearth and stirred faint embers. He added a small log. Flame grew in slow curls. Light filled the room again. He warmed his hands and took a slow breath to steady himself. Morning came cold. Clouds thickened across the horizon. Snow fell in thin grains that stuck to the window. Elias tied his boots tight, pushed on his coat, and stepped outside. Wind struck him at once. Sharp, thin, steady. Snow moved sideways across the yard. He leaned forward and followed the ridge path again. His legs still ached from yesterday's climb. Fear settled deeper with each step, yet the resolve inside him held firm. Holland moved through these woods. Elias refused to leave him to the storm. As he reached the ridge, flakes sharpened. Air turned thick. He held his stick tight. Snow piled fast behind him, hiding his prints before he saw them form. He moved north toward the pond. The crack in the ice widened overnight. The hole looked darker now. Snow swirled across the surface in small rings. He crouched again and studied it. He saw no signs of struggle, no sign of a body, no sign of anything except the slow shift of black water under the ice. He stepped back. Today, he wanted to search farther north past the hollow where he found the crate. Holland's coat sleeve pointed that direction. The watcher gave the same direction yesterday. Something waited there, answers, or danger, or both. He crossed the spruce corridor again. The stillness inside it pressed on him like weight. He held his breath as he walked the narrow passage. Frost hung from the branches in sharp lines. He searched each shadow for movement. When he reached the far end, he paused. He felt cold settle on the back of his neck. He turned slow. The watcher stood behind him, not far, only a few lengths of snow between them. Elias froze. The watcher held the same blurred outline as always. Snow shifted around its edges. Its stillness felt colder than the wind. Elias forced himself to breathe. He raised his chin and stared at the figure. He expected it to fade again, but it did not. Instead, the snow at its feet lifted in thin curls. Not a single print marked the surface. The ground looked untouched. He stepped back one pace. The watcher did not move, but the snow curls shifted toward the left, forming a faint arc that stretched through the woods. Another sign. Another direction. Elias tightened his grip on the stick. He nodded once, more to steady himself than anything else. When he blinked, the watcher faded. Snow filled the empty space. He followed the faint arc. The woods grew darker as he moved. Pine needles poked through patches of snow. Tree trunks widened. Air smelled older, thick, distant. The deeper he went, the more silence pressed on him. Even wind seemed to avoid this part of the forest. He stepped into a narrow gully where snow drifted in uneven lines. His boots sank higher. He moved slow, searching the ground with each step. Something broke the layer of snow ahead. A small shape, dark, thin. He knelt beside it, a pencil, short, worn at one end. Holland used pencils when he marked delivery logs. Elias picked it up. The wood felt stiff from cold. He slipped it into his coat pocket and scanned the gully again. A thin branch snapped somewhere to his right. He raised his stick and turned, breath held tight. Snow drifted from a nearby limb. No figure stood there. No animal moved. Only the faint sound remained. He stepped toward it. The ground dropped in a shallow pit a few paces away. Snow covered it in soft layers. He walked to the edge and looked down. In the center lay another object. A folded cloth. Thick wool. Dark blue. He dropped into the pit and brushed snow away. It was a scarf, the same style Holland wore. He lifted it. Frost broke loose from the fibers. He felt a sting of cold through the wool. He looked around the pit. Snow rested smooth across the edges. No prints led in or out. He closed his fingers around the scarf and climbed out of the pit. He continued north. The woods opened into a long clearing shaped by an old lightning strike that took several trees decades earlier. Their stumps lay under the snow. A thin fog hovered above the ground. The air tasted metallic. Elias stepped into the clearing. His breath rose in bright clouds. He felt watched again. He turned in slow circles, studying each shadow between the tree lines. Nothing moved. Halfway across the clearing, he spotted something sticking from the snow. He knelt and brushed it free. A wooden handle, smooth, broken at the end. Holland's small walking stick. He remembered the shape. Holland carved small grooves near the hand grip to ease hold in cold weather. Elias stood. His pulse quickened. All these items formed a path. Hollin moved through here, but the pattern troubled him. Each item lay placed in a way that felt deliberate. No random scatter, no chaos. A line, a trail. He searched the clearing again. Wind lifted a thin veil of snow and drifted it across the surface. The fog thickened in places, curling in slow shapes near the ground. Then he saw something on the far edge of the clearing. Not movement, color. A thin strip of dark fabric stuck against a fallen branch. He moved toward it. He lifted the fabric. A coat lining. He turned it in his hand. Frost clung to the stitches. His breath shook now. Hollin's coat was torn more than he thought. He lowered the lining and looked beyond the clearing. A steep slope rose into the higher woods. The air above it shimmered with a faint haze. Snow fell thicker the closer he stepped. He climbed with slow effort. His boots slipped more than once. He pushed himself up with his stick. At the top of the slope he found a narrow ridge with a harsh wind crossing it. Snow whipped across his face. He leaned into it and followed the ridge line. Halfway along he stopped. Something lay ahead. A dark mound near a cluster of boulders. He approached with care. Each step pressed deep into snow. As he neared the mound, his breath tightened. He crouched and swept snow aside. A satchel, Hollin's satchel. He lifted it with both hands. The strap tore at one end. Snow filled the bottom. He opened the flap. A few papers lay soaked inside. Ink bled across the surface. A small metal clasp lay broken at the corner. He stared at the satchel for a long time. His throat felt tight. He lifted the papers and brushed snow from them. Most ink ran into pale smears. He slid the papers back inside and closed the flap. He stood again and scanned the ridge. Snow drifted in fast waves. The watcher felt near, though he saw nothing. Each breath burned his lungs from the cold. He stepped past the boulders and looked down the slope beyond. A frozen ravine stretched far below. Dark pines formed a thick wall on the opposite side. Wind echoed through the ravine with low moans. A shape lay near the bottom. Elias froze. It looked like a body. He gripped the satchel tight and edged closer to the drop. The slope was steep. Snow loose. One wrong step meant sliding into the ravine. He moved along the ridge until he found a gentler descent. He stepped down with slow intent. Each foothold he pressed firm. Snow slid behind him in small avalanches. He kept his eyes on the shape below. As he neared the bottom, fear pressed so hard he tasted it on his tongue. His legs trembled from cold and dread. He reached the shape and knelt beside it. He brushed snow off the form. Not a body. Clothes. Packed with snow. Hollin's coat, laid out as if placed. Sleeves spread. Collar open. Snow stuffed inside to hold shape. The sight chilled Elias more than any storm. He lifted the coat and shook the snow loose. The coat is heavy from ice. He stared at the hollow form where a body should be. He rose slowly and turned toward the ravine walls. Snow shifted behind him. Elias spun around. The watcher stood at the mouth of the ravine, closer than he ever saw it. Tall, still, edges blurred by wind. Snow curled in thin spirals from its outline. Elias stepped backward until his heel hit rock. His breath tore from him. He raised one hand toward the figure. The watcher tilted its head. Snow swirled faster around it, then slowed, then formed a faint line leading into a narrow passage on the left side of the ravine. A sign. A direction. Elias stared at it. Wind roared through the ravine. The watcher's outline flickered and faded like smoke. Snow swept through the empty space. Elias lowered his hand and pressed his other hand against his chest. His heart pounded. He looked at the passage. Hollin went that way, or something else forced him that way. Elias picked up the coat and draped it over his arm. He turned toward the passage and stepped forward. Elias stepped into the narrow passage at the ravine's edge. Wind died at once. Snow fell in straight lines as if held by unseen walls. The passage felt older than the woods behind him. Rock walls pressed close on each side. Ice clung in long, clear sheets that captured faint reflections of his coat and face in pale distortion. He steadied himself with one hand on the wall, while the other held Hollin's coat tight against his chest. He walked slow, step by step, breath rising in steady clouds. The ground under him stayed smooth and unmarked. Snow covered everything with even depth. Sound held firm and heavy. No echo returned to him. Each movement felt swallowed by the cold itself. The passage bent to the right. Elias paused before the turn and listened. Nothing. Not even wind reached him here. His chest tightened with the sense he entered a place few walked. His fingers brushed the coat sleeve. He pictured Hollin's steady face and firm stride. Hollin never strayed from paths. Something led him here. Elias turned the corner. The passage widened into a long chamber formed by tall rock walls and a roof of leaning stone. Snow drifted from cracks high above. Thin lines of frost grew in patterns across the walls. The air felt thick, as if every breath weighed more. Elias walked forward and scanned the ground. A lantern sat half buried in snow near the chamber centre. A different lantern than the one he found earlier. This one held a small dent at the top. He recognized it. Hollin used it during late routes when he returned after dark. Elias knelt and brushed the snow from it. The wick inside bent sideways. Frost coated the handle. He picked it up and stood. His breath trembled. Signs pointed deeper. Hollin passed through here, or someone placed his belongings with care. Elias turned in a slow circle. The chamber extended farther than he saw at first. A narrow gap at the far end waited. Beyond it grew a pale glow. Not fire, not sunlight. A soft white shining through drifting snow. Fear pressed deep but could not turn him away. He moved toward the gap. Each step felt louder in his chest. When he reached the opening, cold pushed against his cheeks like a wall. He stepped through. The world on the other side looked like a basin carved by storms long ago. Snow covered the ground in slow shifting waves. Pines rose along the outer rim in silhouettes dark against grey sky. In the centre of the basin stood a structure, not a house, not a shed. A small frame of logs shaped in a square, unfinished, roofless, half buried from storms. A place once built and abandoned. Elias stared at it with deep unease. The logs held old cuts from hand tools. Splinters stuck out in sharp edges. Snow rested in the square hollow of the structure. Something inside the frame moved the snow in faint pulses. Not wind, not animals. He moved closer. His boots sank deep. Snow brushed his knees. He pushed forward until he reached the edge of the frame. He looked down into the hollow. Snow drifted, as if stirred by breath. Then he saw something under the surface. Fabric. Dark blue. A coat. His pulse jumped. He bent down and brushed snow away. Hollin's coat lay here too. Not empty like the one in the ravine. This coat lay heavy, pressed into the snow, as if someone climbed out of it. The collar lay open. The buttons undone. He touched the sleeve. Frost stiffened the fabric. He lifted the coat and looked beneath it. Snow filled the hollow. No sign of a body. He clenched his jaw and rose. His breath broke in short bursts. The watcher guided him here. What waited next? He stepped back from the frame and looked across the basin. Snow shifted near the far tree line. A faint movement. He narrowed his eyes. A shadow slipped between trunks. Tall. Still. Yet moving without motion. The watcher. Elias stepped back toward the basin centre. His boots sank deep. Snow drifted around him in slow curls. The watcher emerged from the tree line and stood at the basin's edge. It did not approach. I watched. Elias raised his chin and stared back. His chest tightened. He felt the weight of old winters and stories pressing through him. The watcher never spoke, yet each appearance gave direction, and each direction led him closer to Hollin or traces of him. Elias lifted the coat in his hands. Snow slid from its edges. He called out into the basin. His voice trembled. He asked where Holin went. He asked if Holin lived. Words echoed weakly. Snow swallowed the sound. The watcher tilted its head again. Slow, deliberate. Snow near its outline lifted in faint spirals. A narrow path formed in the snow between them. A long, thin line of disturbed flakes pointed toward the right side of the basin. Elias stepped toward that line. The watcher remained still. Snow thickened until the figure faded behind the falling curtain. Elias reached the path made by drifting flakes. He placed his foot at its start. The snow under his boot sank deeper than the rest. Not natural depth, something hollow beneath. He knelt and brushed snow away. Wood planks, a trapdoor. He froze. Breath stuck in his throat. He touched the edge of the door and felt rough grain beneath his gloves. Holin might have entered here, or been forced. He knelt lower and cleared more snow. A metal ring sat frozen to the wood. He pulled it. At first it would not move. He tugged harder. Ice cracked. The door lifted slow with a dry groan. Darkness waited below. Elias lowered his lantern and peered into the hollow. Faint shapes formed. Shelving carved from logs. A small crate. A blanket. A narrow ladder leading down. He stepped onto the ladder and descended. Cold grew sharper. Darkness pressed against the walls. He reached the bottom and held the lantern high. A hidden shelter stretched before him. Not large. Enough for one person, maybe two. The air felt old, untouched for months. Snow filtered through cracks in the planks overhead in fine dust. On a small wooden bench near the far wall, something caught his eye. A book. Thin, bound with worn leather. A name etched on the cover. Holin. Elias froze. His breath caught. He stepped forward and lifted the book. He brushed frost off the cover with a shaking hand. He opened it to the first page. The handwriting inside was Holin's. Rushed. Uneven. Ink spread thin in places where the pen shook. Elias read the first line. I hear it follow me. His hand tightened around the book. The next lines fell in short, clipped notes, written across pages with gaps between entries. It stands on the ridge. It carries no weight. It watches. I follow sounds in the woods. Nothing leaves prints. I leave signs behind. They vanish. I fear the storm inside the snow. It does not touch me. It waits. Elias shut the book. His heart pounded. Holin saw the watcher too. Holin felt the same presence on the ridge. Holin left signs that vanished. Elias pressed the book to his chest and closed his eyes for a moment. He opened them again and looked around the shelter. A blanket lay folded. A cup sat overturned. A small knife rested on the crate. Holin prepared this place. He planned to stay here at some point. He stepped to the wall and studied the marks carved into the wood. Not letters. Lines scratched in haste, some straight, some crossed, a pattern of watching and waiting. He heard something above him. Snow shifting. He lifted the lantern and turned toward the ladder. Snow fell through the cracks. A faint outline moved at the trapdoor opening. Elias stepped closer. The watcher stood above the shelter, framed by the open trapdoor. Snow drifted down around its outline. Elias gripped the book tighter. The watcher did not enter. It only looked down. Elias raised the lantern. Light reached the figure, but did not touch its form. The watcher lifted one arm. Slow. Not toward Elias. Toward the far corner of the shelter. A gesture. A point. Elias turned. The corner looked plain at first. Just old wood and frost. But he knelt and brushed the ground. Snow dust fell away. He found a crack between planks. He pried them apart and revealed a second compartment beneath the floor. Inside lay a single object. A letter. Sealed. Holin's handwriting marked the front. Elias lifted it with trembling hands. The seal cracked from the cold. He opened it and read. If this reaches another, now I follow something old. It takes weight from snow. It walks through storms. It led me here. I fear not its shape, but its intent. It does not harm. It guides, yet it guides towards something I sense but do not see. If you follow me, be steady. It brings those who search for truths buried under winter. I go north beyond this place. If I do not return, leave here and speak my name in warmth. Elias lowered the letter. His throat tightened. Holin lived when he wrote this. He moved north even after reaching this shelter. Elias looked up at the trapdoor. The watcher still stood above him. Snow drifted around its form. Then it shifted one step back from the opening. A sign. Elias placed the letter inside his coat. He climbed the ladder, lantern in hand. When he reached the surface, the watcher faded into falling snow until nothing remained. He stood in the basin, heart heavy and chest tight. Holin went north, beyond the basin, beyond the ravine, beyond the hollow. Elias lifted his lantern against the wind and stepped toward the far rim of the basin. Elias stepped out of the basin with the lantern held close, and Holin's letter pressed against his chest. Wind pushed hard against his coat. Snow rose in long sheets that curled across the rim. He climbed the slope with slow care. Each foothold slipped before gripping again. The sky held a grey weight that pressed down on the land. The basin behind him looked smaller with each step, as if the storm tried to hide it again. When he reached the top, he paused. His breath tore from him in ragged clouds. He turned once to look back. The trapdoor vanished under drifting snow. The logs of the frame softened. Wind carved new ridges across the surface. He felt the watcher near, though he saw no outline now. The silence in his ears matched the stillness he felt when the watcher appeared. He faced north. The woods ahead rose tall and dark. Pines leaned in tight rows. Snow weighed down their branches until some touched the ground. Holin wrote that he followed something old beyond the shelter. Elias tightened his grip on the lantern handle and moved toward the northern trees. A narrow path formed between two pines, not carved by men, not shaped by boots. Snow settled in a smooth line that looked disturbed, yet held no prints. He followed it. His boots sank deep. Each step took strength from his legs. The cold bit through his scarf and stiffened the hair near his temples. He walked for nearly an hour before the woods opened again. A clearing formed in a rough circle. In the center lay a heap of broken branches and bark. Elias approached with caution. The branches piled in a strange order. Not storm debris, more like someone dragged them here and left them in a rush. He knelt and brushed snow aside. Under the pile lay a small metal tin. Frost covered its lid. He lifted it and shook the snow free. The tin felt light. Holin used a tin like this to store dried root tea for long roots. Elias pressed his thumb under the lid and opened it. Inside sat a scrap of paper, thin, torn. Ink smeared but still legible in places. He held it close to the lantern. A few words survived the cold. Still watching, north, beyond the ridge. The ink faded into blank white fibers. Elias folded the scrap and slid it into his coat. He touched the lid. Cold stung his thumb. He placed the tin back under the branches to mark his own path. He stood and looked north again. Snow thickened until the woods blurred into pale walls. He pushed forward. The wind died as he entered the next stretch of pines. Here the air turned still in a way that made him pause. No movement, no sound. The cold held the space tightly. He walked on. After some distance, he noticed something strange. The trees changed. The bark looked worn, scraped in long vertical lines. Snow gathered in deep pools near the roots as if shaped intentionally. He knelt beside one trunk and traced the markings. Not animal scratches, not tool marks. Something dragged along the bark with slow force. Elias wiped frost from his glove on his coat and stepped back. Ahead stood an old cabin. Small, tilted to one side from years of storms. Roof sagged, door crooked, windows broken. Snow gathered inside the frame. The cabin looked abandoned for decades. Moss pressed under the eaves, frozen in hard green patches. Elias lowered the lantern and approached. Holland might have entered this place for shelter. He reached the door and pushed it gently. It swung open with a long groan. Inside lay a single room. A broken cot leaned against the far wall. A rusted stove sat in the corner. Snow drifted through gaps in the planks. Elias stepped in and lifted the lantern higher. On the floor near the stove lay a scrap of cloth pressed under a stone. He picked up the stone and lifted the cloth. Dark blue again, same shade as Holland's coat. He held it near the lantern. A thin thread hung from one corner. He set the cloth on the stove and scanned the room. Dust from old winters clung to every board. A wooden box sat beside the cot. He knelt and opened it. Inside lay dried leaves. Crumbled. Frosted. Someone stored plants here long ago. He pressed the lid back down. He stood and looked at the stove again. The metal held faint marks, scratches shaped like lines or symbols. He touched them but could not read their age or meaning. He stepped out of the cabin and turned back toward the woods. Snow drifted from the roof in thin curtains. He scanned the tree line. No watcher, no shadow, but he felt watched again. His chest tightened with the weight of it. He took a step forward. Snow swirled at his feet. A faint ring formed around him. Not wind-borne, controlled. He froze. The ring widened, then broke toward the north. A narrow path of disturbed flakes stretched between the trees. He followed the path. The woods pressed close on both sides. Branches brushed his shoulders. Snow fell from high limbs with soft taps. He moved slow but steadily, checking the ground for signs at every turn. He reached a small ravine cut through the woods. A shallow one, unlike the deep ravine from earlier. Snow gathered along the edges. In the center of the ravine lay a wooden crate. Broken at its lid, Elias climbed down and inspected it. Inside lay more belongings, a folded page, a scarf edge, a cracked cup. Holland left these behind, or they dropped from him. Elias lifted the page. Ink formed thin lines across it. He read the first words. At night, it stands outside my path. I hear no breath from it. I feel no threat, only direction. Elias read on. I go north because it points north. Each time I stop, it stands on the ridge. Each time I turn back, it blocks the path. Not attack, not force, only watch. He lowered the page. His breath came slow. Holland felt pushed forward, but not harmed. Elias folded the page and slid it with the others. He stepped out of the ravine and looked around. A ridge rose ahead. Not tall, but steep and lined with bare birch trees. Holland wrote about a ridge. Elias gripped the lantern and began the climb. His legs burned from the effort. Wind pushed against him. Snow thickened until he could barely see the next step. He reached the top with shaking knees. The wind died again. A wide stretch of land opened before him. Not forest, not the field. A frozen marsh. Long reeds stuck through the snow as brittle stalks. Patches of ice glimmered between them. The marsh stretched far, surrounded by low hills. No sign of life, only stillness. Elias stepped into the marsh. The snow thinned here, wind carved patterns across the ice. The reeds clicked softly against each other. He walked with care, avoiding darker patches where the ice might sit thin. Halfway through the marsh, he noticed something lying near a reed cluster. He knelt and brushed snow aside. A mitten, thick wool, worn at the palm. Holland's. Elias picked it up and held it to his chest. A wave of cold ran through him that had nothing to do with the weather. Holland passed here not long ago. Or someone placed his items to show a path. He stood again and scanned the marsh. Something shifted in the far distance. A shadow near the northern hills. Tall. Still. The watcher. Elias gripped the lantern tighter and felt fear rise again. But something else joined it. Resolve. He stepped forward. The watcher faded into snow, but the direction stayed clear. He reached the northern edge of the marsh and stepped onto rising ground. Snow deepened again. Pines grew thicker. The storm settled heavier across the hills. Each breath stung his throat. He climbed until he reached a flat ledge overlooking another deep stretch of forest. From here he saw no cabins, no shelters, no trails, only a vast winter silence. Then he noticed something new, a faint glow far ahead, small, pale, flickering like light behind snow. He stared at it for a long moment. Hollin might be there, or something that drew him north. He stepped toward the glow. Wind rose behind him. Snow thickened. The hills trembled under gusts that pushed flakes sideways. Elias moved through it with steady steps and a heart that beat both fear and duty. North waited. The glow waited. Hollin waited somewhere ahead. You move with Elias as he walks toward the faint glow. Snow drives across the hills in thin sheets. It sticks to his eyebrows and lashes. It collects on his scarf until the wool feels stiff. He keeps the lantern low to shield its flame from wind. Each step takes effort. The path holds no marks behind him. Snow smooths everything as if the land refuses to remember he passed. The glow ahead stays steady. It does not flare like a campfire. It does not jump like a lantern in a hand. It looks fixed in one place, as if it comes from something set into the ground. Elias keeps his eyes on it while he moves between pines. Branches scrape his coat. Ice forms on the edges of his sleeves. His sore leg burns with each rise. The forest thins as he climbs. Trees give way to rock and low scrub. Snow grows shallow in patches where wind has scoured the surface. The air smells sharp here, almost clean, with less pine and more stone. Elias pauses to catch his breath behind a boulder. He holds the lantern close and listens. He hears a sound at last. Not wind, not branches. A faint clink, metal tapping stone. Slow, uneven, like a tool dropped by a tired hand. Elias lifts his head. The glow sits beyond the next rise. He forces himself forward. He crests the rise and sees a small hollow sheltered by rocks. In the center stands a stone post, waist high, capped with a slab. Snow circles it in a ring. The glow comes from a glass jar fixed to the slab with wire. Inside the jar sits a small wick in oil. It burns with a calm, pale light. Elias steps closer. The flame does not flicker, even as wind slides around the rocks. He reaches out and touches the jar. It feels cold, not warm. The glass holds frost around the edges. The flame burns anyway. He lowers the lantern and scans the hollow. A figure lies near the far rock wall. Elias moves fast, then stops himself and drops to his knees beside the shape. He brushes snow away with both hands. Cloth emerges first, a dark coat, a scarf, a cap pressed low, a face. Hollin. His eyes are closed. His skin looks pale. Frost clings to his lashes. His lips hold a faint blue tint from cold. Elias presses 2 fingers to Hollin's neck. For a long moment he feels nothing. Then a faint pulse meets his fingertips. Slow. Weak. Still there. Relief hits Elias so hard his shoulders sag. He exhales and then takes a deep breath. He speaks Hollin's name in a low voice. He pats Hollin's cheek gently. Hollin does not wake. Elias looks around the hollow again. No tracks lead in, no tracks lead out. Yet Hollin lies here, sheltered, not buried. Someone placed him with care. Elias pulls Hollin's cap higher to check for blood. He finds none. He checks Hollin's hands. One glove is missing. He checks his boots. Laces are tight. No sign of a fall. No sign of a struggle. Only deep cold and exhaustion. He reaches into his coat and pulls out the scarf he found earlier. He wraps it around Hollin's neck and tucks it close. He pulls Hollin's coat. Tighter. Then he opens his own satchel and takes out the small tin cup he brought from home. He sets it near the stone post. He needs warmth here. He needs a fire. Yet the hollow holds little wood. Only scrub pokes through snow near the rocks, thin and brittle. Elias stands and searches the edges of the hollow for fallen branches. He finds 2 small pieces of dry pine tucked under a ledge. He finds a strip of bark and a few dead twigs. He returns to Holin and crouches. He shields the twigs from wind with his body. He uses the lantern flame to light the bark. It catches slow. He feeds it twigs, then the small pine pieces. A weak flame rises. It is small, but it is heat. Elias holds Holin's hands near the flame. He rubs them with his own gloved palms. He speaks in short lines, steady and calm, as if his voice can pull Holin back from the edge. Holin's eyelids flutter once. Elias leans closer. He calls his name again. Holin's eyes open a sliver. They look unfocused at first. Then they lock on Elias's face. Confusion shifts into recognition. Holin tries to speak. His lips barely move. Elias tells him to save strength. He tells him to breathe slow. He lifts the tin cup and pours a small amount of water from his flask into it. He holds the cup near the flame until the water loses its bite. He tips it to Holin's lips. Holin swallows once, then again. His throat moves with effort. His eyes close and open as if each moment costs him. Elias asks one question, low and simple. He asks if Holin can move. Holin makes a small sound, not a full word, a rough breath. Then he nods once, slow. Elias presses his hand to Holin's shoulder and tells him they will leave when he can stand. Holin's eyes shift to the stone post and the jar flame. He stares at it with a look that holds fear and respect at the same time. Holin whispers at last. His voice comes out cracked. He says it set the light. Elias looks at him, then at the jar. He asks who set it. Holin swallows. He looks past Elias, toward the rocks at the hollow edge. His eyes widen slightly. Elias turns fast. The watcher stands there, closer than ever. It stands in the open, framed by stone and snow. Its outline stays blurred, yet the shape is clear. Tall, still, silent. No face, no breath, no prints. Snow around it lifts in a slow curl that never settles into a mark. Elias feels cold flood his chest, yet he does not step back this time. He stays between Holin and the watcher. His hand tightens on Holin's shoulder. His other hand grips the lantern handle. Holin stares at the watcher with tired eyes. He looks less surprised than Elias. He looks resigned, as if he expected this moment. Elias speaks, low and firm. He asks what it wants. The watcher does not answer. It does not move closer. It raises one arm again, slow, as if pointing beyond the hollow. Elias follows the gesture. He sees a narrow notch between rocks on the far side, a passage leading down the north slope. It looks like a safe route out of the hills, away from the marsh and ravines. Elias looks back at the watcher. He understands, in a plain way, what Holin wrote. It guides. It does not strike. It does not chase. It shows a way. Elias looks down at Holin. He asks if Holin went north because it pointed north. Holin gives a weak nod. Elias asks what he found. Holin closes his eyes for a moment. When he opens them, they look wet. He speaks in short fragments. He says he followed the watcher because it blocked the road back. He says it stood at bends and waited. He says he found an old place under snow, not a shelter made by men, but something older, built for a purpose he did not understand. He says he felt a pull there, as if winter itself kept a secret and wanted a witness. Elias listens without interrupting. You listen too, and you feel how the cold presses closer around the words. Holin says he turned away at first. Then he felt shame because he left unanswered questions behind. He says the watcher stood on the ridge and pointed again. He says he followed. He says his strength failed near the basin and he crawled into the shelter. He wrote what he could. Then he walked again. He says he reached this hollow and collapsed. He says the light appeared after he fell. He says he woke once and saw the watcher standing over him like a post in snow. Elias keeps his breathing slow. He watches the watcher. It stays still. No threat in its stance. No kindness either. Only presence. Elias makes a choice. He will not follow north again today. Not now. Holin can barely stand. A new storm builds. Night comes fast in winter. He will carry Holin back to warmth. He will return later if the watcher still points. He shifts and slides his arm under Holin's shoulders. He lifts with care. Holin groans but does not resist. Elias pulls him upright. Holin's feet scrape the snow. He leans his weight into Elias. Elias braces his sore leg and steadies them both. The small fire crackles low. The jar flame stays steady. Elias takes one step toward the notch between rocks. Holin shuffles his feet. They move as one slow shape. The watcher remains at the hollow edge. Snow curls around it, then falls flat again. No prints form, no marks remain. It watches them leave. They reach the notch. Wind returns in a rush. Snow slaps Elias's face. He leans forward and pulls Holin with him. The path descends in a narrow line. Rock walls shelter parts of it. In other parts, wind hits hard. Elias keeps his grip tight. Holin stumbles once. Elias catches him. He speaks calm words. He tells him to look down and place each foot. He tells him to match the rhythm. Holin obeys. His face stays drawn. His eyes blink slow. His breath comes shallow. As they descend, Elias looks back once. The hollow sits quiet behind them. The stone post and the jar flame still glow. The watcher stands there, a pale shape against the grey. It does not follow. They move farther down. Trees return. Pines close in. Wind softens. The descent becomes a path through thick forest. Elias uses his stick to test the ground before each step. He avoids darker patches where ice might hide. He keeps Holin close. Hours pass in slow effort. Light fades. The forest turns blue-grey. Snow thickens again. Elias's arms ache. His sore leg throbs. Holin's weight feels heavier with each mile. Still, Elias does not stop. He knows stopping means freezing. At last they reach the edge of the frozen marsh. Reeds click in the wind. The surface looks slick. Elias hesitates. Crossing near dark is dangerous. Yet the marsh is the shortest route back. He shifts Holin's arm over his shoulders and steps onto the marsh carefully. Ice holds. He takes small steps. He tests each patch. Holin stays quiet. He breathes with effort. He watches the reeds sway. Halfway across, a sound reaches them. A low crack beneath the snow. Elias freezes. He looks down and sees a thin fracture line creep outward from his boot. He moves his weight off the spot at once and steps toward a reed cluster where ice looks thicker. He guides Holin after him. The fracture stops spreading. They continue. Slow. Careful. Cold bites deeper now. Elias's fingers feel numb even through gloves. Holin shivers so hard his teeth click. Elias speaks to him in short lines and keeps him moving. They reach solid ground at the marsh edge. Elias exhales and rests for one breath only. Then he pulls Holin into the trees. He follows the ridgeline back toward the village route. Snow falls heavier. Night settles. By the time Elias reaches the first cottages, lanterns glow in windows. A door opens as they pass. A man steps out with a shawl around his shoulders. He sees Holin and rushes toward them. 2 more villagers appear. They take Holin's other side and help carry him. They bring Holin to a warm cottage near the square. The hearth burns hot. A pot simmers. The smell of broth fills the room. They lay Holin on a cot and cover him with blankets. A woman wipes his face with a warm cloth. A man pours a small amount of broth into a cup. Elias stands near the door, chest rising and falling hard. Heat stings his cheeks after so much cold. He watches Holin's eyes open and close. Holin is alive. Weak, but alive. The villagers ask what happened. Elias gives only what he must. He says he found Holin in the hills. He says Holin got lost in the storm and collapsed. He does not speak of the watcher. He does not speak of the jar flame that burned cold. He holds those things inside for now. Holin grips Elias's wrist with weak fingers and pulls him closer. He whispers one line, barely audible. He says the watcher will return. Elias nods once. He tells Holin to rest. He steps back and lets the others tend to him. When Elias leaves the cottage, snow falls thick in the dark. The village looks small and warm, like a pocket of life in a white world. He turns his face toward the direction of his home. He knows he must return tonight. He Also knows the hills still hold answers Holland touched and then fled. You feel that pull too. You feel winter tighten around the path ahead. Elias leaves the village after midnight. Snow still falls, softer now, thicker in the air. Lantern light fades behind him as he steps onto the long path toward his home. His body aches in places he did not know before. His shoulders burn from holding Holland upright. His sore leg throbs with each step. Still, he moves with care and purpose. The night feels different now, quieter, less sharp, as if winter has drawn a breath and waits. He walks alone. No watcher appears on the ridge. No shape waits near the trees. That absence presses on him more than fear did. He keeps his lantern low and follows the familiar bends of the path. Snow erases his steps as soon as he lifts his feet. The land keeps no record of his return. When his cottage comes into view, relief loosens his chest. Smoke still rises from the chimney. He opens the door and steps inside. Warmth meets him. The fire has sunk low but still lives. He shuts the door and leans against it for a long moment, eyes closed, breathing slow. He removes his coat and hangs it near the hearth. His gloves feel stiff with ice. He sets the lantern down and feeds the fire until flame rises again. Light fills the room and pushes shadows back into corners. The small space feels safe in a way it has not for days. He sits at the table and places Holland's journal and letter in front of him. He studies them in silence. Holland survived. That truth steadies him. Yet Holland also followed something old and silent into the north. That truth weighs heavy. Elias pours hot water into a cup and drinks. His hands shake now that the work is done. Exhaustion settles into his bones. He eats a small piece of bread and cheese without tasting it. His thoughts drift back to the hollow, the stone post, the cold burning flame. He wonders how long it stood there. Who placed it? Or what? He moves to the window and looks out into the dark. Snow drifts across the yard in pale waves. The ridge hides behind falling flakes. No outline waits there. He listens. Only wind. Only the faint creak of wood as the house shifts in cold. He sleeps little that night. When sleep comes, it holds no dreams. Only deep dark stretches broken by waking. Each time he wakes, he listens for movement outside. None comes. Morning arrives slow and grey. Elias rises and tends the fire. He eats again and packs a small satchel. He adds bread, dried meat, extra wool socks, and a coil of rope. He pauses, then adds Holland's journal. He does not know why. It feels right. He pulls on his coat and steps outside. The storm has eased. Snow lies deep but calm. The air feels clean. The ridge shows again, pale under cloud cover. Elias scans it out of habit. Nothing stands there. He walks toward the village once more. Holland rests there. Elias wants to see him with daylight between them, to be sure he still breathes steady. The village stirs when Elias arrives. Smoke rises from several chimneys. A dog barks once, then falls silent. Elias reaches the cottage where Holland lies. A woman opens the door and nods when she sees him. Inside, Holland rests under thick blankets. Colour has returned to his cheeks. His eyes open when Elias approaches. They hold fatigue, but also focus. Holland grips Elias's wrist again, firmer this time. They speak low. Holland says his head feels clear now. He remembers the hollow. He remembers falling. He remembers the watcher standing near him as the light appeared. Elias asks if Holland fears it. Holland thinks for a long moment. Then he shakes his head. He says fear came later, when he realized he could not turn back. He says the watcher never touched him, never harmed him. It only waited. Elias asks what Holland found north of the basin. Holland's eyes drift toward the window. He says he found signs of old work under snow. Stone laid in lines, wood buried deep. Not houses, not shelters, something shaped with intent. He says he felt winter press closer there, like the cold watched him back. He says he fled when his strength failed, not because of danger, but because he felt he was not meant to stay. Elias listens and nods. He does not ask more. Holland grows tired again. Elias tells him to rest. When Elias steps outside, the sky brightens a little. Snow stops falling. A pale stillness settles across the land. He stands in the village square and feels the pull again. North, beyond the ridge, beyond the marsh. He returns home by midday. The path feels shorter now, familiar. His cottage welcomes him with warmth and silence. He sets his satchel down and sits near the fire. He knows he will go north again. Not today. Soon. Days pass. Snow falls and lifts in cycles. Elias tends his chores. He checks his stores. He cuts wood when weather allows. Each night he listens. Each morning he scans the ridge. The watcher does not appear. On the fourth morning, Elias finds something new. Near the fence line, where snow drifts high, a narrow line of disturbed flakes curves toward the ridge. No prints. Just a subtle change in texture, like breath passed over the surface. Elias stands still and watches. The line fades as sunlight touches it. Snow settles smooth again. The sign feels deliberate. He prepares at once. He packs more supplies this time. Extra bread, a flask of warmed broth, rope, a wool blanket, his lantern, Holland's journal. He leaves a note on the table in case he does not return by nightfall. He steps outside and locks the door. The ridge path waits. As Elias climbs, he feels no fear now, only focus. His breath stays steady. His steps remain slow and sure. Snow still erases his prints, but he no longer looks back to check. At the ridge he pauses. Wind lifts loose flakes. The hills stretch white and vast. He sees the watcher for the first time in days. It stands near the old pine bend. Same height, same blurred edges, same stillness. Elias does not freeze this time. He nods once. He steps forward. The watcher turns and moves, not walking, not gliding, simply shifting position from one place to the next, always ahead, always waiting. Elias follows. Snow curls at the watcher's outline, then falls flat again. They move north together. They pass the pond, now frozen thick. They pass the spruce corridor. They pass the basin. Each place feels quieter than before, as if winter holds its breath. The watcher pauses at each turn, then continues. By afternoon they reach a stretch of land Elias has not seen before. The trees thin. The ground rises in shallow terraces. Snow lies lighter here, blown aside by constant wind. Stone appears beneath the surface. Elias kneels and brushes snow away. He finds a straight edge, then another. Stone set by hands long gone. Lines form, shapes repeat. A pattern emerges beneath the snow. Foundations. Old. Deep. Purposeful. The watcher stands at the far edge and waits. Elias rises and steps forward. As he does, a feeling settles in his chest. Not fear, not wonder. A quiet understanding. This place was built to mark something, not a home, not a grave. A boundary. Winter thickens here. Sound dulls. Cold deepens. The land feels heavier. Elias walks the perimeter. He sees posts buried in snow. He sees channels carved into stone that guide meltwater in spring. He sees signs of long labor meant to shape how winter behaves here. He understands now. The watcher is not a being of harm. It is a keeper, a guide tied to this boundary. It watches for those who stray too close without purpose. It leads them away or brings them back when needed. Holland followed out of duty and curiosity. He was shown the edge and turned back. Elias followed out of care and resolve. He was brought here to see. Elias stops near the center of the old foundation and looks at the watcher. He thanks it. The words feel plain, but true. The watcher does not respond. It does not need to. Snow lifts around its outline one last time, then it fades, not dissolving, not leaving, simply no longer visible. The land grows still. Elias stands alone among buried stone and silent winter. He feels no pull to go farther. The boundary holds. He has seen enough. He turns south. The walk home feels lighter. Snow still hides his path, but he no longer minds. He carries the knowledge inside him, steady and warm. When his cottage comes into view at dusk, smoke rises from the chimney where he left embers alive. He steps inside and shuts out the cold. That night, Elias sleeps deeply. Winter remains long, storms still come, paths still vanish under snow. But Elias walks them without fear now. He knows some winters to watch back. Elias wakes before dawn with a calm he has not felt in many winters. The fire rests low but steady. Ash glows faint red beneath the logs. The house smells of smoke, wool, and dry wood. Outside, wind moves soft across the roof. Snow presses against the walls in quiet weight. He sits up and listens. Nothing pulls at him. No pressure in his chest. No sense of being watched. Only the slow rhythm of morning in winter. He rises and tends the fire. He eats bread and drinks warm water. His movements feel measured and sure. When he steps outside, the sky holds a pale blue edge near the horizon. Snow reflects that colour across the yard. The ridge stands clear and empty. He does not search it. He spends the morning cutting wood near the shed. His axe strikes clean. Each swing lands true. Snow gathers on his shoulders and melts into damp patches on his coat. His breath stays even. He works until his hands ache, then stacks the logs with care. As the sun climbs, he hears footsteps. That sound stops him at once. He turns toward the path from the village. A figure moves through the trees. Human, bent slightly, slow but steady. When the figure steps into the open, Elias lowers his axe. Holin, wrapped in a thick borrowed coat, a scarf tied high around his neck, his face still pale, but his eyes alert. He walks with a stick and pauses often, yet he moves under his own strength. Elias sets the axe down and steps forward. Holin smiles, thin but real. They clasp hands. Holin's grip feels weak but warm. He looks around the yard, then at the ridge. He says he wanted to walk while he still could. He says the village felt too small after what he saw. He says he needed to stand on open ground again. Elias nods. He leads Holin inside. They sit near the fire. Elias pours broth and sets bread on the table. Holin eats slow. Steam rises between them. The room feels fuller with another presence inside it. They speak little at first. Silence holds weight but no tension. At last Holin lifts his eyes. He says the dreams stopped last night. Elias asks what dreams. Holin says the ones where he walks north and never stops, where snow thickens until he forgets warmth, where the watcher stands ahead, waiting. Elias listens. Holin says when he woke this morning, he felt finished with that path, not frightened, finished, as if the road closed behind him. Elias understands. They sit longer. Fire crackles. Wind brushes the shutters. Outside, daylight strengthens. Holin stands at last. He says he will return to the village before dark. His strength holds, but not for long. He thanks Elias. He speaks the thanks without weight or drama, plain and deep. At the door, Holin pauses. He turns and asks one thing. He asks if Elias saw what lay beneath the snow. Elias meets his eyes. He nods once. Holin exhales and smiles faint. He says, "That is enough." He steps out into the cold and walks back toward the trees. Elias watches until Holin fades from sight. Days pass. Winter settles into a steady pattern. Storms move through, then clear. Elias keeps his routines. He checks traps. He cuts wood. He carries letters when roads open. He visits the village once a week. Holin recovers strength and returns to work in time, slower now, careful with long routes. No one speaks of the watcher. Elias still walks the ridge at times. He stands and looks north. He feels no pull, no warning. The boundary holds. One afternoon, after a heavy storm, Elias notices something near the pond. The ice has cracked again, but not from weakness. The lines form a wide arc, smooth and even. Meltwater drains through channels beneath the surface. The pattern mirrors the stone lines he saw far north. He kneels and studies it. Winter shapes itself here. He rises and moves on. That night, Elias dreams. He walks a path under snow. The land lies quiet. He feels no fear. Ahead stands the watcher. It does not block him. It does not point. It stands beside the path, not on it. Elias passes without stopping. He wakes rested. Late in the season, when days lengthen by minutes at a time, Elias receives a letter from his sister. Her hand shakes less now. She writes of clearer lungs and fewer fevers. She writes of warmth returning to her bones. She thanks him for the care he sends through words and coin. Elias folds the letter and sets it near the hearth. Gratitude settles deep. Snow still covers the hills, but something shifts beneath it. One morning, Elias finds animal tracks near his shed. Deer, fresh, clear. Snow holds them instead of erasing them. He follows the tracks a short way, then stops. He does not need to go farther. Winter loosens its grip slowly. Weeks later, a traveler passes through the village. An old woman wrapped in layers of patched wool. She speaks little. She trades dried herbs for bread and a place near the fire. At night, she tells a quiet story to the few who listen. She speaks of winters that watch their edges, of old boundaries laid by hands long gone, of guides shaped from cold and silence, meant to keep balance rather than harm. Elias listens from the corner. He does not speak. When the woman leaves at dawn, she nods to him once, as if she knows. Spring comes late. Snow thins. Paths reappear. Mud replaces ice. The ridge shows bare stone again. The pond clears in patches, dark water moving slow beneath melting edges. Elias walks farther now. He checks the far traps. He follows old routes without fear. He never sees the watcher again. But sometimes, when storms rise fast or travelers lose their way, Elias feels a quiet certainty. The boundary still holds. The guide still stands where needed. He understands now that not all guardians leave footprints. Years pass. Elias grows older. His steps slow. His hair turns pale at the temples. He keeps the house warm. He keeps letters flowing between hills and villages. He helps when storms trap others. He knows when to turn back. In deep winter, when nights stretch long and snow erases sound, Elias tells no stories of fear, only of care, of watching the land, of listening. One night, many winters later, Elias feels cold settle deeper than usual. His breath comes thin. He lies near the hearth and watches flame flicker low. Outside, snow falls in wide, gentle sheets. He feels no pull, no watcher, only rest. In the morning, villagers find him still and peaceful, hands folded, face calm. The fire has burned low but not out. Smoke rises faint from the chimney. They bury him when ground allows, near the ridge he walked so often. Snow covers the place at first, then melts away. Stone emerges beneath, firm and sure. Paths still vanish under snow some winters. Storms still confuse travelers. But many return safely without knowing why. And sometimes, when snow falls without sound and the land seems to breathe, you might feel watched in a quiet way. Not with fear, with care. Winter deepens again before it loosens. Days shorten for a while longer, then hold. Elias does not count them. He feels the change in the way light sits on snow and in how cold settles into wood at night. Life grows quiet after the hills release their grip. The village settles into routine. Holin returns to his work in smaller measures. He avoids long northern routes. He does not say why. No one asks. Elias keeps to his home and the paths near it. He rises before light and tends the fire. He eats plain food. He checks his stores. He listens to wind and snow the way some listen to voices. Winter teaches him to hear what matters. One morning, after a night of heavy snow, Elias finds something strange near his door. A single line pressed through the drift. Not a print, not a track. A smooth, shallow curve, as if snow settled differently in one narrow place. It leads from the fence toward the ridge, then fades. Elias stands still and watches it. Sunlight touches the curve and softens it. Within minutes, it vanishes. The surface turns even again. He feels no fear. He does not follow. That day, he walks to the village to deliver a letter for a farmer whose hands shake too much to write. The path feels firm under his boots. Snow crunches instead of swallowing sound. He meets a boy hauling a small sled of firewood. The boy smiles and nods. Elias nods back. At the square, the baker's door stands open. Warm air spills out. The smell of bread rests heavy and good. Elias buys a small loaf and tucks it into his coat. He leaves a coin more than needed. The baker thanks him without words. When Elias returns home, clouds thicken again. Snow begins before dusk. Wind rises slow, then stronger. He shutters the windows and feeds the fire. He sits at the table and reads Holland's journal again, not for answers, but for memory. He stops at the last page. The writing ends mid-line. I think the land remembers. Elias closes the book and sets it aside. That night the storm grows loud. Wind presses hard against the walls. Snow taps and scrapes along the roof. The house creaks but holds. Elias sleeps in short stretches, waking to tend the fire. Near dawn, during one of those quiet moments between gusts, Elias hears a sound. Not outside, inside. A soft settling, like snow falling from a branch onto packed ground. He opens his eyes. The room looks unchanged. Fire glows low, shadows stretch long. He sits up and listens. There it is again. A sound near the far wall. Elias rises and lifts the lantern. Light spreads across the room. Nothing stands out. He walks slow toward the sound and lowers the lantern near the floor. Snow dust rests there. A thin scatter of it, no larger than a plate, just inside the door. Elias kneels. He touches it. Cold bites his fingers. The snow looks fresh. It melts slow under the lantern glow. The door remains barred. Elias stands. He does not rush. He does not call out. He watches. The snow dust shifts, not sliding, not blowing. It lifts in a soft curl, then settles again. A faint shape forms for a breath of time. Tall, narrow, still. The watcher, inside his home. Elias feels no panic. His chest tightens, but not from fear, from surprise. He steps back one pace and waits. The shape does not move closer. It does not touch anything. Snow does not spread. The outline holds for a moment longer, then thins. Before it fades, Elias understands something new. The watcher did not cross the boundary. Elias did. Not by walking north, by living, by carrying knowledge, by holding balance. The watcher stands here because Elias now holds a part of what it guards. The land does not need the guide in the same way when a man remembers its limits. The shape dissolves. Snow settles flat. No mark remains. Elias exhales slow. He opens the door. Wind rushes in. Snow sweeps across the threshold. He steps outside. Storm clouds break in the east. Pale light spreads across the yard. Snow glows soft and clean. No sign of the watcher remains. The ridge looks bare and quiet. Elias steps back inside and closes the door. He bars it and returns to the hearth. He feeds the fire and sits until warmth returns to his fingers. When daylight fully arrives, the storm eases. Snow stops. The world looks reset. Elias spends the day clearing paths. He shovels near the door. He opens a narrow trail to the shed. He leaves the rest untouched. Some snow deserves to lie. In the afternoon, Holland arrives again. He moves better now. His stride holds more strength. He carries a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He sets it on the table and unwraps it. Inside lies the jar, the one that burned cold. Hollins says he found it near the basin when the storm broke. It stood unburied, clean, untouched. The flame no longer burns. The wick sits dry and dark. Hollins says he felt it belonged with Elias. Elias studies the jar. He touches the glass. It feels like any other now. Cold, ordinary. He thanks Hollin and sets the jar on the shelf near the hearth. Not as a relic, not as a warning, as a reminder. They sit and drink broth together. They speak of small things, weather, supplies, the road. Neither mentions the watcher. Before Hollin leaves, he pauses at the door. He says one thing. He says some places do not want to be crossed. Elias nods. Winter moves on. Snow thins by degrees. Drips form at the eaves. Paths return. Streams crack and flow again. The pond breaks free of ice with slow sighs. Elias walks to the ridge one last time before spring. He stands and looks north. The hills rest quiet. Stone lines remain hidden. The boundary holds without effort. He turns away. Years pass in steady rhythm. Elias grows older in small ways. His hands stiffen. His back bends. His eyes tire sooner at night. He accepts these changes without struggle. He becomes a man others seek when storms rise fast. He listens to travelers and tells them when to wait and when to turn back. He never speaks of guides or watchers. He only says the land speaks if you slow enough to hear. Some listen, some do not. Most who listen return. On one long winter evening, a young traveller knocks at his door. Lost, cold, afraid. Elias brings him in, feeds him, and gives him a place near the fire. The traveller sleeps deep. In the night, Elias wakes and listens. He hears wind shift. He feels snow settle. Outside, far from the house, a tall shape stands on the ridge. It does not move closer. It does not need to. Morning comes. The traveller leaves with clear directions and warm food. Elias watches him go. He looks once toward the ridge. Nothing stands there. Elias smiles faintly and turns back inside. Winter passes. Winter loosens its hold for a time, then tightens again. Snow returns in waves that feel gentler than before. Elias senses the difference. Storms still come, but they arrive with warning now. The land speaks earlier. He listens. He wakes one morning to a pale sun and a sky cleared of cloud. Snow rests smooth across the yard. He steps outside and breathes in cold air that no longer bites as hard. The ridge looks calm. No pull draws his eyes north. Only habit makes him glance there at all. He spends the day repairing the fence, where posts leaned under winter weight. His hands move slower now. He rests more often. Still, the work gets done. He stacks wood. He checks the shed roof. He hums a low tune his wife once favoured, though he does not remember when he learned it. In the afternoon, children from the village pass along the lower path with sleds. Their laughter carries through the trees. Elias pauses and listens. Sound travels farther now that winter thins. He smiles and returns to his work. That evening, he lights the lantern early. Shadows stretch longer across the walls. He eats soup and bread and sits by the fire with Hollin's journal open on his lap. He does not read the words. He traces the worn edge of the pages with his thumb. When he closes the book, a thought settles in him. Calm, certain. This winter will be his last long one. The thought does not frighten him. It arrives without drama, like a quiet knock he has been expecting. Days pass. Snow melts in places, then returns at night. Ice cracks along the pond. Birds test the air with brief calls before falling silent again. Elias moves slower, but his mind stays clear. One morning, he finds a set of tracks near the ridge. Human. Fresh. They lead north. Elias studies them. The prints hold shape. Snow does not erase them at once. The traveller walked recently. The tracks head toward the basin. Elias knows what this means. Someone crossed the boundary without knowing. He prepares without hurry. He packs bread, broth, rope, lantern, and blanket. He leaves his door unlocked. He does not expect to need it again. He steps onto the path and follows the tracks. The walk feels longer than before. His breath comes shallow on climbs. He rests often. The land feels watchful again, but not tense. More like waiting. As he nears the basin, the tracks falter. They circle once, then break toward the ravine. Elias follows. He finds the traveller near the old stone post. A young woman. She sits on the snow with her back against a rock. Her coat lies open. Her hands shake. Her eyes stare wide and unfocused. Frost clings to her lashes. Elias kneels beside her and speaks her name, which he finds written on a tag sewn inside her coat. She blinks and looks at him as if waking from deep water. He wraps her hands in his blanket. He presses the cup of warm broth to her lips. She drinks with effort. She whispers that she followed a light. Elias nods. He asks where she came from. She names a village far south. She says she took a shortcut she found on an old map. She says the snow swallowed the path. She says the light appeared and led her here. Elias listens. He looks toward the basin edge. The watcher stands there, clearer than he has seen it in years. Tall, still, patient. Elias rises and faces it. He does not speak. He understands. The watcher did not fail. The boundary held. The traveller crossed without knowledge, not without cause. Now the balance calls for Elias. He helps the young woman stand. She leans hard into him. He guides her toward the safe descent he knows. The watcher does not move. It watches them go. The walk back is slow. Elias's strength fades faster than he expects. His chest tightens. His vision dims at the edges. Still, he keeps moving, step by step, breath by breath. They reach the edge of the marsh as dusk settles. Elias pauses too long. His knees weaken. He stumbles. The young woman grips his arm and cries out. Elias steadies her. He smiles and tells her to keep moving. He points the way. He says others will find her soon. She begs him to come with her. He shakes his head. He lowers himself to sit on a rock near the reeds. He wraps his coat tighter. He presses the lantern into her hands. He tells her to follow the path he showed her. He tells her not to look back. She hesitates, then obeys. Elias watches her disappear into the trees. The cold settles deep now. His breath comes shallow. His hands feel numb. The watcher appears at the marsh edge, closer than ever. It does not loom. It does not threaten. It waits. Elias looks at it and feels gratitude. He lies back on the snow. He watches the sky darken to blue, then black. Stars break through thin clouds. Snow begins again, light and steady. The watcher stands beside him now. Not above, not ahead. Beside. Elias feels warmth then, spreading through his chest, easing the ache in his limbs. His breath slows. His thoughts drift. He thinks of his wife's voice, of letters carried through snow, of paths that vanish and return, of hands held near fire. The watcher fades as the snow thickens. By morning, villagers find Elias where he lies. Snow covers him gently. His face looks calm. His hands rest folded. The young woman stands nearby, wrapped in blankets, alive. They bury Elias near the ridge when the ground softens. Stone marks the place. Simple. Strong. Winter lifts. Paths return. But when storms rise fast, travellers still find their way without knowing why. And when snow falls thick and sound fades, you might feel a presence watching with care. Holding the line. Waiting. Snow settles over the marsh by morning. It lies smooth and quiet, as if nothing passed there during the night. Wind moves light across the reeds. Ice holds along the edges. The land rests. Villagers come with care and silence. They lift Elias with gentle hands. They carry him along the path he knew so well. No one speaks much. Words feel too sharp for the air. They place him near the ridge when the ground softens. Stone rests firm beneath. They set a marker there, simple, unadorned. A name, a date, nothing more. Snow falls again and covers it, then melts away in time. The young woman Elias saved stays in the village until spring. She helps where she can. She learns the paths with patience. She listens more than she speaks. When she leaves, she walks the long, safe road and never takes shortcuts again. Holin stands at the ridge once after the burial. He removes his cap and lowers his head. He does not look north. He looks toward the village and the road. He turns back with steady steps. Winter passes. Years move on. The hills keep their shape. Storms still rise fast. Paths still vanish under snow. Yet fewer travelers vanish with them. People learn when to wait. They learn when to turn back. They feel it without knowing why. Children grow and hear no stories of watchers. They only know that the ridge feels different, that the marsh feels heavy, that some shortcuts never save time. In deep winter, when snow falls straight down and sound dulls, the land feels held, not trapped, held. Sometimes a traveler pauses on a ridge and feels watched, not with fear, with care. They take a safer road. They reach warmth before night. Sometimes a storm breaks early. Sometimes a path opens where none stood before. People call it luck, or weather, or timing. The land remembers. Spring comes and loosens the last ice. Water runs clear through channels carved long ago. Grass pushes through where snow lay thick. Stone lines remain hidden, doing their quiet work. No one rebuilds in the basin. No one settles near the boundary. It stays as it is. Years later, when memory thins, an old marker near the ridge draws little notice. Snow covers it. Rain clears it. Moss grows at its base. Travelers pass without knowing the name. But the balance holds, and when winter comes again, slow and steady, you feel it too. You feel how some nights rest deeper, how silence feels shaped, not empty, how cold can guide as much as warn. You listen, you wait when needed. You walk when the way feels right. Thank you for staying through this winter path. If your body feels heavy, let it rest. If your breath feels shallow, slow it. Snow stories work best when you let them settle. In the next video, we will walk with another quiet figure from the past, through a colder night and a different kind of waiting. There will be a small gift for you there, something gentle to carry into sleep. For now, stay warm. Let the night hold you.